Back to reality now. Remember, we brought you the story yesterday of a protest outside the Standard Bank offices by activists. They were against what they call the bank's investment in the East African crude oil pipeline project. But the bank has denied this, saying that it's considering all options on the matter. And of course, this is not all they've said. But let's speak now to human rights and climate justice activist Kumi Naidoo, who was carried out of that particular building yesterday, as we saw in some of the footage and the pictures. Kumi, good evening to you. And thank you so much for your time. Before we even get to the response of the bank, take our viewers through what happened when we saw pictures of yourself and Malik Dasu being carried out of the Standard Bank Rosebank offices yesterday.
So Standard Bank was having its annual general meeting, and some of us went there very early in the morning and even were offered coffee. Some people were even offered coffee, and then at some point, the 15 or so of us who got there, just assembled and presented the case. 3 of us gave brief speeches, and then we just sat down with banners urging Standard Bank to not continue investing as much as they are doing in fossil fuels and to shift their focus, especially given some of the investments they've made, like in KZN with Tendele coal, which has led to, the death of activists. We've got the East African crude oil pipeline and so on. And then at some point, things just got somewhat moved very fast, to be honest. I saw Malik being, rough-handled. And when that happened, I went there and I said, what's happening? And then I said, well, if you're taking him out, I'll go out with him. I didn't quite think I'd get completely picked off my feet as fast as I did. But anyway, that's a small issue, really, about what happened. The big issue is the purpose of it.
Yeah.
And the purpose is that our leaders are in denial. Our political and business leaders are in denial about how close to the climate cliff we are. Now, none of us in the climate activist movement thinks that we can shift off oil, coal, and gas overnight. We've never said that, right? But what we are saying is that given that we know now how close to the cliff we are, when you look at what happened in Durban, in 2 days, 450 lives were lost just like that last year, and people are still in homeless shelters, devastation to an extent that we've never seen before. And, the climate crisis is with us. So now that we know that, all we are saying to the banks and to Standard Bank is no fresh investments while we try to transition on our dependency that we have on fossil fuels. So new investments should go into clean technologies, not into dirty technologies. That's the message, and the bank and all the banks in our country need to learn that message. And I think part of what we were trying to signal yesterday is that given that we are running out of time to campaign against every oil, coal, gas company destroying forests and so on, the strategy that we're going to pursue now is to follow the money and go after the banks and stop the flow of capital at source, so that all those polluting industries actually can be brought under some sort of sanity, so that they do not take our children and grandchildren's futures closer and closer to destruction.
Yeah, and I'm going to get to the bank's denial, and what they've said in just a moment about how they believe that they are still, their potential investment could be small and all of that. But I want to latch on to something that you've said, which is around some of the communities. And we've seen what is happening. And you touch on a very important subject of what happened in KwaZulu-Natal. Is this a case of denial? That we are on the cliff? Or is it a case of simply not understanding how serious the issue of climate change is?
Absolutely. And actually, there's two psychological terms we can put forward. There are 2 diseases that we are dealing with. Cognitive dissonance, which is exactly the denial of reality. Basically, we are at 1.2 degrees of warming since the start of burning of oil, coal, and gas. The scientists told us once we hit 1.5, we are at a point of irreversible, runaway, catastrophic climate change. And it says that already we're seeing such big impacts, and every small increase is going to take us closer and closer to the cliff. And we can see that our government does not have the capacity to actually respond when big weather crises, climate events that we saw in Durban last year. So now the second disease that we face, which is the reason why we have climate change, is the worst disease humanity faces, and that is a disease called affluenza. And this is the pathological illness where people have been led to believe that a good, meaningful, decent life comes from more and more and more material acquisitions, and that the level of inequality that we have between rich and poor is acceptable. And unless we get real and start talking about those issues, we don't get to solutions. But right now, I think the optimistic side of things is that young people are taking the leadership all across the country. And even though my generation has failed, I have faith in the efforts of the young generation, and I was happy to yesterday be there to support mainly young activists, understanding clearly what needs to be done.
I'm sure you've seen what Standard Bank is saying on this one, and we've also aired through our colleague Nozintombi Mia, who was monitoring that particular process, that particular protest, in fact, denying investing in the project and saying that the project is already underway and that the funding the bank is being asked to consider is very small relative to the whole project. The project is already underway. How do you respond to that?
So I would simply say, what you call very small, right? That amount of money that you call very small could, if invested in South Africa, in micro solar grids for rural communities, could take at least 1/10 of rural communities that live in energy poverty in South Africa out of it. So it's not small. And the consequences of continually saying that we accept the science, we accept how bad things are, we know that our children's future are just at stake as our, their children's future is just at stake as ours. It's no point saying all of those things conceptually and theoretically and then getting stuck with cognitive dissonance and behaving in the same way. Now listen, we understand that banks and other lending institutions could also be supported by much more clarity by the political leadership on the continent and globally, right? And the fact that they don't give clear regulatory signals is also a challenge. So right now, when we find ourselves having to go up against Standard Bank, let me also say very clearly, it's an absence of political leadership to give the kind of guidance of let's get ahead of the renewable technology curve so that we can actually be able to be an exporter rather than a dependent on Western technologies as we currently are.
A conversation we definitely should continue to have. Kumi, thank you so much for your time this evening. Do appreciate it. And of course, let's watch then what happens with this one. That was human rights and climate justice activist Kumi Naidoo.